Welcome, everybody. The name of the show is The Next Chapter. I'm your Amazon best-selling author, Fred Hughes. So what's this show about? It's about the written word. I write military science fiction. I try to have a diverse group of people associated with writing and the publishing industry on the show to talk about all things writing. Today's guest, Rob Howell, is an author and editor, and he runs the new Mythology print for Chris Kennedy Publishing. So he does a little bit of everything. So we've had publishers, editors, obviously other authors. So we talk about all things writing. I wanted to talk a little bit, you've heard me talk about it before. Every Saturday evening I get together with a bunch of authors, and just shows what kind of life I live, that I spend Saturday nights talking to a bunch of other authors instead of doing anything fun like going to the movies or anything else. What can I say? I live an exciting life. So we sit around and we talk about chit-chat and enjoy each other's company, and sometimes we talk about football or baseball or politics, although I try to stay away from that. But most of the time, the conversations all evolve into writing and what we're working on, what we're struggling with, what's good, what's bad about our industry. And this past week, it was early in our call, and there were only a handful of writers on there so far. And I was talking to a writer in particular and asking her what she had going. And she brought up that she was having a problem with a publisher. Turns out she had written two different books, that she had turned in, and the publisher was sitting on them. Now, I know enough of her work that the publisher wasn't sitting on them because they weren't any good. I mean, she's written enough good stuff that at the very least he would have sent them back to her with suggestions on what she needed to do to fix them, fix the two books if there were problems. But I'm bringing it up because it pointed out an issue that a lot of new authors that are trying to break into the industry fall into, and that's intellectual property. And what do I mean by that? When you write a book, you write it in a universe. You write it, you create, you either create your own universe, and it may be it may be here and now, or maybe shortly in the future, whatever. But you as the author define the structure of the world or universe that you're writing in. Or you might write in someone else's universe, which is someone else's intellectual property, meaning you have to obey the rules and the setup of that universe. It also means that you're at the mercy of whoever owns that universe. Because if they don't accept your book or they don't like your book, I won't mention any, then they don't have to publish it. And you just spent, you just wrote a book that's, let's say, 100,000 words. For me, that's 2 months worth of work. For other people, that might be half a year. It might be a year's worth of work. So you just spent, let's just pick a number and say you just spent 6 months writing a book and submitted it to a publisher, writing in someone else's universe, and they don't like it for whatever reason. You're stuck. You can't take that book back. and publish it yourself, because someone else owns that intellectual property. So you just can't decide, I'm going to indie publish it. No, because someone else owns that universe. You would have to either just eat the book and put it away in a file drawer and hope maybe the publisher or whoever owns the intellectual property will reconsider and publish your work. Or you have to go through and do a complete rewrite of the book, stripping out anything that connects it to the intellectual property. Another time-consuming, which may totally change the book. This author friend of mine had not written just one book like that. She had written 2. Now, they weren't in the same intellectual property. They were actually in 2 different intellectual properties. How do you avoid getting into that dilemma? Well, 2 things you should always do before you write a book in that manner. You're going to write someone else's universe. And one of my universes that I created, that I write in, I've opened it up for other authors to write in it, and I've told them the same thing, and I'm having them do the same thing. If they want to write a story in the universe, then they need to write 3 or 4 chapters, submit that to me so I can review it and say, yeah, I like the idea where this is going, and then with that, submit an outline. And then I go, hey, and then I give them a heads up saying, yes, we will figure out a way to get, write this, we'll publish it. We'll get it published. So then you're not spending 6 months writing a book that's never going to see the light of day. You've written it, I liked it, you've gotten a commitment from me that I'm going to publish it or get it published. Or you get invited, or you could get invited. I've been invited to write in other people's universes. I don't, because I don't have time to write all the stories that I have running around in my head. But I have been invited to write stories or books in other people's universes. So, as a new author, be careful when you're writing a book in someone else's universe. You could end up eating it. Same thing applies for you have a story and you're shopping it around. You need to investigate, and this author who wrote the 2 stories should have done this. You need to do due diligence as an author and check out the publisher. When you submit a story to them, check them out, find out, I don't want to say how reliable they are, because that sounds like you're running a, background check, a criminal background check, and that's not the case. But all publishers are not equal. Some publishers publish books on a more frequent basis than others. Some publishers specialize in specific genres. We're going to talk about it today when we talk to Rob Howell and the new Mythology Press, which is the fantasy arm of Chris Kennedy Publishing. There are people in the industry that perceive that Chris Kennedy's fantasy books do not do as well as his others. Well, part of that is because Chris Kennedy's bread and butter has always been military science fiction. The people who subscribe to his newsletter, the people who follow Chris Kennedy Publishing on Facebook and in other media outlets, are primarily military science fiction people. So if you're publishing a fantasy book through Chris Kennedy Publishing, the reach might not be as good. I'm not saying you can't succeed, because John R.R. Osborne, who writes the Milesian Accords, and we're going to talk about that with Rob Howell, has been extraordinarily successful selling fantasy books with Chris Kennedy Publishing. I'm not saying don't send your fantasy story to Chris Kennedy. I'm saying do your due diligence, research the publisher, and make sure that the story you're submitting is in their wheelhouse. There are publishers who specialize in fantasy. And if you're submitting a science fiction novel to them, a military science fiction novel, it may not sell as well. The same for post-apocalyptic. Urban fantasy is a genre almost all its own, and people either like it or don't like it. If you're writing stories, check the publisher out, make sure he can support your book so that it has the best chance of succeeding. All right. When we come back from the break, Rob Howell, editor and publisher of Chris Kennedy Publishing's Fantasies line. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is The Next Chapter. Welcome back, everybody. As advertised, I'm happy to welcome an old friend, Rob Howell, author, editor. He manages Chris Kennedy's fantasy press, New Mythology Press. He runs a quilt store. He's just a man of many talents. So here's Rob Howell. So welcome to the show, Rob.
Thanks for having me on.
Why don't you start with telling everybody who Rob Howell is and how did you get involved with all of this?
Well, my name is Rob Howell, obviously. I am a former medieval academic who realized that the academic world was not really a place that was going to succeed for me. And so I transitioned to writing fantasy, which publisher perish was never the issue in academia. For me, it was always the opportunities of things I wanted to write. So I found I wanted to write fantasy, and I found I wanted to write science fiction. And along the way, I have had the opportunity to write horror and alternate history and use the skills that I gained initially as an academic to help me move along as an author and an editor now and a publisher, and my fingers are in a lot of pies these days. I think for me getting into this was sort of an act of desperation. I was in a very bad place at one point. My wife had left me. I couldn't get a job because of all the education I had but wasn't using, and my mom got breast cancer, and I was living a life where I was just simply existing, and that's not a place that I like to be. I may not be the hardest working fellow in the world, but I can't not work, at least not, and be healthy. And so I started into writing as, let's see if I can do something with my life. And I wrote my first book, and I was, I'm here to tell you that the first version of that book was not something I'm terribly proud of in one sense. I'm so much better now that I look at the original version and I think, wow, I'm glad I've gotten better. But in fact, I did a re-edit. I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, you're not the only one. I go back and look at my early stuff and I'm going, oh my God, what trash.
Yeah. I actually went back and last year I re-edited all of my books in that series, and put out some of them. And I'm much prouder of what they are now. And the stories are still the same, but the writing is snappier, it's faster, it's got more energy, and it doesn't have near the wasted words I had at one point. And again, that's you're supposed to feel like that. Your first book is supposed to be your worst book, but you can never get to writing your second book and getting better without writing the second one. So yeah, that's sort of how I started. I started because I needed to do something.
So you wrote your first book, and what happened to it?
I self-published it. I created the cover. I mean, I hired cover art, but then I did the layout of the cover. I did everything else besides the artistic part, and made a ton of mistakes. But I have to say that it was one of the most profitable experiences in my life, if only because making those mistakes helped me grow into a lot more capable publisher now than I would have been. I have a much better grasp on cover art. I have a much better grasp on the cover blurb. Now, I've studied a lot on both of these things to find out what seems to be working in the marketplace, but I made those mistakes, and now I have a better understanding, a better jumping off point. I have a better understanding of the layout and what we can do with it, and how do we brand products? How do we brand series? I think series branding is one of the most important things a new writer can do. If you have a series of books that are all interconnected, they need to all have visual cues on the book cover itself, whether we're talking the Amazon cover or a physical cover, that tell the reader without hardly having to think, hey, that's from that series. So, for example, if you want to go back to the Firehall Sagas page that you just showed a second ago, that Firehall Sagas, some of the aspects are part of every cover. They all show, for example, that cross sword device is in there, and some other things are in there. They're always on that cover, and so people can always look and see, oh, it's Firehall Sagas. Now, it does actually say, of course, Firehall Sagas in a font like that. But the point is to make sure that there are constant cues. Keep the same font for what your title. Make sure, another thing that I did as a mistake on my first cover is my name was in really small font. And that was because I was trying to show the story better, the art better. But a great deal of what we're selling as authors is ourselves. I mean, I do it. I think most people do. And that's go to the store and go, okay, I'm waiting for the next. For me, it was Dick Francis or Robert B. Parker or David Weber or David Drake. Which one of these is the new one out? I got to have this author's name, and I don't really care about the name. And I think most of us do that. So if we don't put our name on something in big enough that people will remember it, if they buy my book, A Lake Most Deep, which is the first of my fantasy mystery stories, and they say they like it, but then they have trouble finding it because they can't find my name easily, or they can't find the series name, Firehall Sagas, then I've made it much more difficult for them to go down the road. Thank you. There you see the Firehall Sagas cover, the logo up top at the line up top at the is on all of the covers. My name's immediately underneath it. Then we have the title name, and then we have some aspects to it right there. So, and then there's the epigram from Glenn Cook. That was a funny moment. If you'd have seen me, if there'd have been a camera on me when I opened up the email from him, it would have been quite an interesting picture. Glenn Cook, as I'm sure all of you know, is one of the greatest science fiction and fantasy writers that has ever lived. He wrote the Black Company series. He wrote the Garrett PI series, and he's got a bunch of other things out there. And I've been working with him to get Black Company stories in many of the anthologies I put out for New Mythology Press. And one day I got an email from him out of the blue that said, hey, I just thought I'd read something that you've done of your own. And I picked up A Lake Most Deep, and that was literally what he said, a damn fine read. And let me tell you, I was pretty chuffed about that.
That makes for good advertising. You've included that in some advertising, I hope.
I have, in fact, included that in advertising. I've been actually blessed with a number of people who've read my stuff and liked it. Larry Correa has said very nice things about my writing, and in fact included me in one of his anthologies. He and Casey Azell did a series of noir-themed speculative fiction anthologies. Take your best fantasy and science fiction setting and put it in a noir theme, and then see what happens. And it turns out that that's kind of what I ended up writing. So
when we come back from the break, Rob's going to talk some more about fantasy and Chris Kennedy Publishing. This is Fred Hughes and the next chapter. Thanks for staying with us. We're still talking with Rob Howell, fantasy writer, publisher, editor. And we left off talking about how he got started in his Firehall Saga books. I want to talk a little bit about how did you parlay that into writing or being a part of Chris Kennedy Publishing?
The basic answer is I asked. I went to Chris. He has these yearly get-togethers, which are now called Factory Con, in October. And if you are interested in Chris Kennedy Publishing at all, you should go. A lot of the writers will be there. But basically, I went to him in one of these and said, "Hey, you look like you're stretched thin. Could I take over the fantasy side of things for you?" At that point, I had already completed an anthology for him called When Valor Must Hold. And that anthology had been a series of fantasy stories with, everybody involved had to do something valorous. And it went pretty well. And then, so I asked him, and he gave me the opportunity. And it has been, in many ways brilliant, in many ways frustrating, in many ways a challenge that has gone really well, and in some ways it hasn't. I asked him and started taking over right before the pandemic hit, which didn't help anything at all. But it is the way things sometimes work. So what do I think have been some of the challenges that we faced? One of the challenges is that our audience tends to skew towards military science fiction and that sort of thing. And broadening our audience has been something I've been trying to do with some success, and wish to have more success in the future of building that up. One of the best successes we've had, and it's starting to make inroads, is the work done by Casey Azell on our mailing list. If you go to the chriskennedypublishing.com fantasy section, you will see a place. Let's see, up at the free story. Yep, there it is. Scroll down, join our fantasy fan community. Right there, just add your name and add your email and sign up, and you'll get weekly updates about what's going on in the new mythology universe. This comes out every Wednesday. This week's came out this morning, and it's talking about the various authors who happen to be from New Mythology Press, who are work with New Mythology Press, and who happen to be at Dragon Con. If you're at Dragon Con, check out John R. Osborne and Casey Azell and David Shadoin and H.Y. Greger and Tricia J. Woldridge. All 5 of those authors will be at Dragon Con strutting their stuff, and they're really talented. It's an honor to work with all 5 of them, especially right now. One of the most exciting things happening in New Mythology Press is what's going on with the Milesian Accords. The Milesian Accords is a series started by John R. Osborne that basically suggests that centuries ago, the mundane world and the magical world made an agreement where they would split. And all the magical, generally speaking, all the magical folk would go to one world, and all the mundane folk would go to another. And then at one point, yes, this is the series right here. And in The Reluctant Druid, we find out that accord, the Milesian Accord, has expired. And an Illinois farmer gets tasked with the job of integrating the two worlds, the magical world and the mundane world, back together. Spoiler alert, it doesn't always go smoothly, but it's a huge task, and there are some other characters out there that help him along the way. And this has been 5 books that have done really well. They've been Dragon Award finalists. They have been given rave reviews over the years. It's great stuff. And in fact, the 6th one in John's series is coming out probably somewhere in February or March. We'll see. Somewhere in that line is when we're hoping. But more exciting is that he has now opened up the universe to some other subsidiary authors, including Haley Greger. Haley is an up and coming author you may not have heard yet, but she is so talented and so skilled. So she is giving us a trilogy of stories in that setting. One of my favorite aspects of that setting is that his basic concept is that everything, all the magical stuff went away, and that included all the mythologies. Now it's coming back, and therefore all of the mythologies are in play in the world. So, well, you see reluctant druid, and you'll think Celtic mythologies. That's in there. Norse mythologies. That's in there. But you get all sorts of things, like there's Native American and there's Japanese and there's other mythologies coming through. And in point of fact for Haley's, she's focusing on Russian mythologies, which is really exciting to me because in my academic time, I spent a goodly amount focused on Russian medieval history. So I got a chance to read the Russian epics and sagas, which are quite fun. Hold that screen right there on that one right there for just a second. In any case, Milesian Accords is about to explode from 5 books to 9 by somewhere around March, and a lot more coming because there's a number of other things planned in that universe. If you like that universe, it's something you're going to get a lot more content in, and you're just going to love it. And if you haven't tried that universe out, boy, do you have something waiting for you. You're going to love it. But since we've got Responsibility of the Crown and Responsibility of the Throne, the Endless Ocean, on the screen, I would be remiss to point out that Responsibility of the Fleet comes out on September 13th. So we're talking basically 2 weeks from Friday. We've got the third in that series coming out. Scott happens to be the first, and I think still the only, but I'm not positive on that, the first winner of Bane's short story contest in both fantasy and science fiction. So you can tell he's quite a talented author, and he really is an innovative guy with a bunch of neat stuff. In this case, he's included magic and dragons and battleships and World War II era fighters and more, and thrown them all into this great big melange of awesomeness. So since you had that on the screen, I thought I should mention it. We've got a lot of things going on throughout the next year or so already. I've got new series coming from a number of authors. Each one of these will be 3 books to start. From the way we do things anymore is if we start a new series, we try to start with 3 books. So that's just the way we have to go these days. That's what fantasy readers want. They want to have at least 3 books, and I can't blame them. If we ask you as a writer to invest in our universe with whatever magic we've added, with whatever technology we've created, with whatever geopolitical stuff we've started, that's a lot of investment we've asked of every reader, and we owe them at least 3 books worth of enjoyment for that investment, is my opinion. So we just decided we wanted to do it. We want to give them that 3 books. We want to give them their investment's worth quickly so they don't have to wait. So there's no question of any Patrick Rothfuss or George R.R. Martin in any of it.
Well, I mean, and I agree. I mean, fans get tired of reading a great first book, and then it's like, oh, when's the next one? And it's like, fans have a very short memory, and if they're waiting more than a year, they're going to move on. Well,
in fact, you say that, and that was our initial plan, is that you would get we would do 1 book each year, and that was what readers wanted. Except that one of the big discoveries, one of the mistakes I made, one of the mistakes we sort of realized, both Chris and I, is that that's not what readers want anymore. They don't want a book a year. They want at least a starting point of 3, and then they're willing to wait some time after that. But the shorter we can make that, the better. And so
you get them hooked right off the bat, and then they will wait. because they're
They
now
will wait.
invested, and because now they're invested. But one book, I mean, I'm that way. I won't get invested in a new series or a new author if there's just one book out there. I'll wait and
I
see
won't
what
either.
else. I'll wait and see what else comes from them.
Well, and the truth is, this is how we consume just about everything. We consume everything on Netflix. We watch.
Wait till
I'll
the
watch
series. Yeah.
season after season of Midsummer Murders or Death in Paradise or Ted Lasso or all of these shows, and then I'll flip to watching 4 seasons of something else. That's how we watch stuff these days.
Right. All right. When we come back from the break, Rob is going to talk about everything else that's happening in his life. And guess what? That includes quilts. So, after the break, more from me and the next chapter. Welcome back. We're talking to Rob Howell, fantasy writer, editor, publisher extraordinaire. So, tell us about quilts, Rob.
My wife is. Well, let me just start with. I know a lot more about quilts than I ever thought I would. I have a lovely wife, and she is an extraordinary quilter. And she's done a variety of other things in her life. She was trying to get away from doing that quite as much, and we stumbled on a fantastic old building in Anthony, Kansas that was big enough for me to have a bookstore, for her to have a quilt store, and for us to move into small town life, which we have really enjoyed. And as you can see the website, we are happy here doing all sorts of quilting services. We provide long arm quilting, which is something I didn't even know existed before I met my wife, but it's this big long arm machine that makes it easy to do quilting. And there's a quilt that she made right there with a red dragon on it. So we provide all sorts of quilting supplies like patterns and thread and fabric and all sorts of things like that. And we can ship them across the United States. If you noticed up top, $5 flat rate shipping anywhere in the contiguous United States. I think it's up just a little bit further. It says up the top bar, which isn't showing apparently on the screen, $5 flat rate shipping. There we go. You see the fabric shop hops. Those are some neat stuff. If you're a quilter, you know what a shop hop is. One of the things I have learned about quilters is they love to go on shop hops because quilting is so much like a treasure hunt to find the right fabric. And we enjoy that aspect of it too. In fact, that's where I proposed to my wife. We were on a quilt shop hop, and we were in I can't remember. I think it was Independence, Kansas, that we were in at a quilt store, and I proposed to her. The end of a long day of letting her check out quilt stores, driving around Kansas. A lot of fun. So that's how I got into this and started learning about quilts. I still have a long way to go. My wife often laughs at things I don't know and guess at. But I suppose that's the way it's supposed to be.
And you can find.
We also have a boatload of looms, and she does a ton of quilting. We have this battleship row of the long arm quilter and big looms in the store, which is quite fun. So if you're interested in weaving and big looms, we have those as well.
And they can find that at reddragonquilts.com, and that's Red Dragon with 2 D's in the middle.
Yep.
So look that up if you're interested in quilts. I still have an old quilt made by my grandmother that we keep on our bed, and it's a prized possession. So go there if you want to acquire your own prized possession.
Yep, and again, we provide the long arm quilting aspect, which is the part where you take the quilt and the back and you stick the batting in between and you sew it all together. And this machine does it makes it so much easier because you can stretch it out. I can't imagine how people did that. I mean, I can imagine, but just the challenge of doing a quilt by hand or on a small machine is just amazing to me. But quilters are amazing folks, and that's why I married one.
So, what does Rob Howell have coming up as far as personal appearances and stuff, and the like?
Well, my favorite personal appearance coming up is at Chattacon. That's in January. It's the third Saturday of January.
A special guest.
I am the Toastmaster there. Okay. I'm extraordinarily honored to be the Toastmaster, and can't thank the com too much for having me on the crew. I am excited to be a part of it. Chattacon.com, I believe. I suppose I should have looked this up sooner. Pardon me, to make sure, because I want to make sure. Yep, chattacon.org. My mistake. And it is January 17th through the 19th of 2025. And come out and join us. We've got a heck of a time planned for everybody. I have to say that the people in Chattanooga, the people who run conventions in Chattanooga as a whole, between Chattacon and LibertyCon and the other conventions that they run, that is one awesome crew of people. If you get a chance to go to any conventions in Chattanooga, just in general, that they really are good at it. And you'll never have a bad con in Chattanooga. At least I haven't. And I've been to, 15 or so at this point.
And you're going to be at FactoryCon this year?
I am not. Okay. I've got too much going on, and in that weekend actually is a particular weekend that I have planned. We just have an errand to run that weekend, unfortunately. So, yeah, I don't have a lot scheduled this fall, and some of that's by intent. Over the last year, I have published 2 books of my own, a number of books of other people, including an anthology, and set up 2 businesses. And that's on top of moving and dealing with a bunch of life things. And summers are always really busy times for me. In fact, I've spent approximately 6 weeks this summer away from home. This is normal, but 5 or 6 weeks away from home. And frankly, I just needed some time to mostly stay around and gather myself for getting myself into a great 2025 and making sure that all the gains that I've made in terms of the shop and in terms of the things we've done with New Mythology, done all those things and made them better. I'm happier where we're making progress in all of these things. I need to make sure that stays there and continues. So I kind of taking the fall off.
Okay, well, that's
from
fair
traveling.
Enough. That's fair enough. I mean, there's a lot, as I tell everybody that watches the show, there's a lot more to being an author than writing. I mean, there's your marketing, there's your, newsletters, there's your, appearances, networking, just staying up on your post on Facebook and Twitter and everything else to keep your fans
and let's
engaged.
Not forget how important juggling your fatigue level is. Authors will routinely burn themselves out trying to do things and maybe succeeding, but getting themselves to a point where they've done so much that they hurt themselves from a mental fatigue standpoint. I've done this. I've seen a number of other authors run into this. Give yourselves times to breathe. Larry Correia calls it sharpening the axe. Yep. These are important too.
So I want to thank Rob for being on the show. It was fun, and we learned all about fantasy and publishing and New Mythology Press and quilts. What more can you ask in a show? So that's it for this week's show. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is The Next Chapter.